Hey Team COGIC friend, welcome back to my channel. I am happy that you're here to review this week's lesson with me. So I'm a person who likes to watch the news. I watch Good Morning America in the morning. I watch the 5 o'clock news. I watch the 10 o'clock news. I'll catch a little MSNBC, CNN during the day. I just like to know what's going on, and I really enjoy listening to the perspectives of different commentators, even if I don't agree. But I've talked to so many people lately who say, I just don't like to watch the news. I don't like the way it makes me feel. It's heavy. It makes me feel depressed, and I get it. Because so much of what we hear is laden with social injustice and stories of economic inequality and the struggles of marginalized communities. Have you ever looked around and thought, why does life seem so unfair sometimes? Or why do good people struggle while those who do wrong seem to get ahead? Well, if you've ever wrestled with those questions, just know you are not the first person. Job asked the exact same thing. And in this week's study, we're going to take a look at Job chapter 24, and we're going to see more raw, thoughts from Job as he asks hard questions about justice, suffering, and God's timing. So if you're ready to unpack some real talk about faith, frustration, and finding hope when life doesn't seem to make sense, then grab everything that you need to study. Your Bibles, your journals, your pens, your handy dandy notebooks. It's time for us to get into this lesson. Hello to every one of you. Hello, TSSG family. Hello, TSSG family. You're in the TSSG space. Well, hello, TSSG family.
Changing the way you see Sunday school with that Sunday school girl.
Hello, TSSG family, and welcome to the Church of God in Christ lesson review for Sunday, October 13th. My name is Waynell. You're in the TSSG space, and here I share Christian content that is largely inspired by and or based on our Sunday school lessons. I do serve the Church of God in Christ and international communities, and I am excited to review this week's lesson with you entitled Hope Complains. Before we get into the lesson, I want to say welcome to everyone. A very special welcome to those of you all who are new. I don't know how you found the channel, but I am so glad you are here. Welcome to an incredible community of believers. We're learning, we're growing together as we study God's word. So everyone, newbies and everyone, make sure that you look down below, that you're subscribed to this channel. Just click the button that says subscribe. That will get you connected. But also take the next step of clicking the notifications bell. I don't want you to miss any of the content when it is released on this channel. And the last thing I'm going to ask you to do is please take a moment and click that thumbs up like button. It is an encouragement to me for sure, but it also curates your experience on YouTube. We provide these videos every week at no cost to you. So if you would just share back the love with that thumbs up like, it would mean the world to me. We've got another wonderful lesson this week as we are back in the book of Job. This week our lesson title is Hope Complains. We're going to Job chapter 24, verses 1, 9 through 12, and 19 through 25. Our Bible truth: God takes care of the unjust and saves the needy and gives the poor hope in the battle they are waging. Our memory verse is going to be verse 1, and our lesson aims that we will explore Job's complaint about the appearance that God does nothing to call wicked people to account. Appreciate that although the timing of God's justice is often inscrutable to us, it is certain, and determine ways to help God bring justice to the poor and weak. Let's pray, and then we will read our lesson passage and explore it together. Father, thank you. You are good and you're kind, and we love you for who you are and all that you mean to us. And we thank you for these moments that you give us together in your word. Thank you that as we navigate life and the things that don't seem fair, we know that in the midst of it, you are present and that you are helping us through it all. So God, as we go through and even as we observe injustice that is around us, cause us, first of all, to have a reaction to that and be willing to get involved when we see things that are not right, but more than anything, to know and to rely on your strength, your power, your wisdom as we navigate, and never to give up hope that you are with us. God, I pray that you bless every person who's present and anyone who catches replays of this lesson. We love you. We give you glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Job chapter 1. Why, seeing times are not hidden from the Almighty, they that know him, not see his days. Verse 9. They pluck the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge to the poor. They cause him to go naked without clothing, and they take away the sheaf from the hungry, which make oil within their walls, and tread their winepress, and suffer thirst. Men groan out of the city, and the soul of the wounded crieth out, yet God layeth not folly to them. Verse 19. Drought and heat consume the snow waters, so doth the grave those which have sinned. The womb shall forget him, the worm shall feed sweetly on him. He shall be no more remembered, and wickedness shall be broken as a tree. He evil entreateth the barren that beareth not, and doth not good to the widow. He draweth also the mighty with his power. He riseth up, and no man is sure of life. Though it be given him to be in safety whereon he resteth, yet his eyes are upon their ways. They are exalted for a little while, but are gone and brought low. They are taken out of the way as all other, and cut off as the tops of the ears of corn. And if it be not so now, who will make me a liar, and make my speech nothing worth? This is our lesson for this week, which is absolutely a little King Jamesy, but there's a lot to unpack inside of this lesson. I wanted to spend a few minutes because I thought the title was incredibly provocative, like hope complains. What does that mean, that hope complains? And for me, I really think that this lesson is all about like holding on to faith, yet having this ability to express real frustration about how things look in the moment. So when I see this title, like I think about how hope is not blind. The fact that we're believers, that we love God, that we're saved, sanctified, have the Spirit of God, that we are not blind and we're not silent about the things that are going on. So as I've looked at this lesson with Job, I believe that hope is honest. I don't think that hope covers up what's going on. Hope doesn't ignore pain. Hope does not ignore the injustice in the world, but hope speaks up, right? I believe that we have a responsibility to speak up, and we have a responsibility to ask tough questions. So Job is hopeful because even though he's struggling, like no doubt about it, he is struggling with what he sees, he still believes God. He still believes God. He believes that God is still just. All right. And at the same time, his hope doesn't stop him from crying out and saying, God, this just isn't fair. This is not fair. So for me, this title really reflects on the reality that hope doesn't mean pretending that everything is fine. Hope does mean that we trust in God while we're being real about the facts. We're being real about the fact that things are not right. We don't lose hope in God. And it also shows us that God is big enough to handle our complaints. He's big enough to handle how we feel, and he's big enough to handle our moments of frustration. We can still have faith in God's ultimate justice. Let's take a quick look at our background. Mine is not much change from last week, and if you missed last week's lesson, I do encourage you to go back because I gave a lot of background on Job, the things that he faced, where he was. So I won't repeat all of that, but just know that the book of Job, the author is actually unknown. It was written during a time of the patriarchs, so it's believed that maybe it was even written around the time of Abraham. The purpose of the book is really to grapple with these questions that we've already laid out, and largely, why do good people suffer? Job was a good man. We established that last week. The text tells us that he was a good man who eschewed God. He eschewed evil, rather. He loved God. He eschewed evil. He was a family man. He was a husband. He was a father. He was actually a good friend, even when his friends weren't good to him. And so at the same time, he had to walk his own complex journey of faith and of suffering. And inside of it, though, he never loses sight on like who God is and really the nature of God. And, at the risk of repeating myself, I will say that the nature of God does not change based on our suffering. The nature of God doesn't even change based on our feelings. Like, God is faithful, God is sovereign. And so as we look at Job's experiences, we are invited to, wrestle ourselves with these ideas of injustice and justice, and really like the mystery of how God uses suffering and how he uses pain, and how in the middle of all of that, somehow our faith is built. Our cast of characters for this week's lesson, and by the way, there's so much more inside of my TSSG notes. If you are interested in my notes from the lesson, the link is in the description box down below. They've actually been up for a couple of days. And there are also 20 questions to go along with this lesson. So whether you want to explore them on your own for the sake of kind of digging deeper in the lesson, or you're a teacher and you want to open up some conversation with your class, some pair and share, or individual questions, they're great for that setting. And then there's also a kid pack. If you serve young people, there's a kid pack that goes along with this lesson. The kid pack is great in class or as a printable that you can send home to encourage parents to help young people engage with the Bible even during the week. So our cast of characters this week. There is Job again. He is our main character, and he's continuing like this deep conversation that he's had with God. He is really talking about unfairness, how things are just unfair in life. And he's looking at the world that's around him and seeing that it seems like the wicked do what they want to do, and they never have to be held accountable. And yet you've got these innocent and vulnerable people who do suffer. So, Job is frustrated, he's confused, and he's asking questions. Why does God allow this? And then there is the oppressed. And the oppressed are the people that Job is describing, like the orphans, the poor, the needy, the widows. And these are individuals who are mistreated by the wicked. And yet the cries for help for these people seem to go unanswered. And so they represent what I'll consider the powerless in society, who are often ignored or taken advantage of. Then there's the wicked. The wicked are those people that Job is actually complaining about, right? They are the ones who are responsible for the oppression, for the mistreatment that Job is witnessing. So they steal, they cheat, they harm those who are vulnerable, and yet it seems like they are not held accountable. They don't have consequences for their actions. So Job is really upset because it seems like they can go on with their lives like they've done nothing wrong. And then there is God. God is not directly speaking in this passage, but again, he is who Job's questions are directed to. So Job just wants to understand. And I believe that God is big enough to handle our questions and all of the feelings and emotions that go along with us having conversation with him. So Job believes that God is a God who is just. And so how does a God who is just allow injustices and things to exist without intervening? So that's our cast of characters. In last week's lesson, Job had been facing, unimaginable suffering. He lost everything, right? He lost his wealth, he lost his family, he lost his children, he lost his health. Then he had these friends who show up and they initially confront him about, what's going on. And then they ultimately turn that into accusations. This must be your fault. This is because of some sin in your life. And so they insisted that Job's suffering was actually his fault, that he had somehow sinned against God. So Job was feeling abandoned by his friends, abandoned by God, and he yet hung on to the belief that his Redeemer lives. He said, I know my Redeemer lives. So he expressed, his hope in God, even though he did not understand his current situation. So since last week's lesson, we're moving now to chapter 24. Since that dialogue with his friends has continued, but the tension in it has escalated, and Job's friends have become more aggressive in their accusations, and Job is more frustrated. And so by chapter 24, he really starts to reflect on the injustices that he is seeing around him. He's no longer just thinking about his personal suffering, right? He's looking at the world and he's wondering, why does God seem to allow wicked people to prosper and innocent people are out here suffering? And Job feels like he's crying out, but God's justice seems like it's hidden from him. So it's a feeling of abandonment. And so he's frustrated. There's no doubt about that. And y'all, I just want to say, I think there is space for us to be honest in our feelings and honest in our emotions. We just need to know how to channel that, right? And how to direct that. So Job is wrestling with big questions. And there's nothing wrong with wrestling with the question. We should do that. Fairness, justice, why life feels so broken. So his issues are unresolved, and he's caught still between this deep desire. Like, despite what he sees, like, Job has a deep desire to trust God, despite the reality that's going on around him. He just wants to, like, understand what is this deal with suffering and the apparent silence of God in the face of injustice. Let's take a look at verse 1. In verse 1, Job raises a really deep question. He wants to know, why are not the times of judgment kept by the Almighty, and why do those who know him never see his day? So he's essentially asking, doesn't God fix times? Like, doesn't he fix the time of judgment? Isn't he in charge of time and control that? So he's frustrated because there seems to be no clear order to what's going on, no real fairness about how justice is handed out. So again, you're watching good people suffer while wicked are getting away with it, and there are no consequences. And so his confusion, is not unlike things that we feel. So when Job questions that, he's trying to understand this time of judgment. He's referring to like a specific or an appointed time when justice will be divvied out, when it will be done. But in Job's eyes, it seems like, okay, God, that's not going to happen. The Hebrew word here indicates like a legal ruling or a decision. So he's like, God, when are you going to make a decision on all this bad behavior? Why don't you have a clear schedule when you're going to bring these folks to justice? It seems like, God, you got me out here living in a world where people just do what they want to do, and there's no accountability, and, there's no real structure because there is no accountability for sort of these moral outcomes that happen as a result. And so Job, I can't say enough, his feeling is frustration. It's personal, but at the same time, it's nothing that we can't identify with, right? He's speaking for everyone who has ever felt like this is not fair, right? When I look around and see things that are happening and they are just not fair. And not only that they're not fair, right? The frustration that Job expresses is like on behalf of all people who are just out here trying to live for God, trying to do what God asked you to do, trying to do your best to follow God, to live right, to be good people. And he's frustrated because he says, those who know God don't seem to be getting any special protection from the God that we say that we trust and that we believe. He doesn't seem to be stepping in or intervening. And so even the faithful don't seem to be getting a break from this suffering. So Job continues to try to deal with, why are the righteous suffering when they're doing their best? Why are the bad ones suffering? Righteous, the ones in right relationship, why are they suffering? And Job feels like there's no like transparency in God's plan, like it lacks visible justice. So he questions, is God's justice hidden? Why doesn't it show up in a way that we can understand, right? And we all kind of have a way that we, want justice to be done, or have an idea of what that looks like to make, the things even, or to put people back in a place as if a harm had not happened, or to hold someone accountable. And Job is saying it just doesn't look like I think it's supposed to look. So again, I think this is a struggle that lots of us as believers can go through, especially when you are doing all that you can, trying to do everything that feels right. Here are my key learnings just from verse 1. God's timing is not always clear. It is not always clear. And it's certainly, when I say clear, it means it's not necessarily in alignment with my expectations. So just because I don't see justice happening right now or in the ways that I think it should, it doesn't mean that God is not aware of what's going on. It doesn't mean that God is not going to act. It does mean that I just need to trust God and trust the fact that he sees the bigger picture, and that his sense of timing is perfect, even if it doesn't make sense to me. And if you've been around here for a while, I'm honest. Like, I like to know the plan. I like to know what's going on. I like to know when it's going to be. I went to a conference this weekend, which was a fantastic conference. But one of my frustrations going into the conference was I need an agenda. I want to know I don't need to know. if I don't need to know specific sessions, but if I'm going to be in session from 9 to 12 and I have a break from 12 to 1:30, I need to know that. I need to know what's happening so I can pack the right clothes. Or in my case, I had some folks who wanted to come and see me while I was in Atlanta. So I wanted to know when those reasonable breaks were. But back to God's timing, as someone who likes to know the details and the timing and the plan, we just don't get all of that. Yet I realized from this passage so far that it is like okay to ask hard questions. I believe that asking questions is a part of our faith. I think that sometimes we wrestle with like those challenging places, the difficulties in our faith. And I want you to note again that Job was a good guy. Like, he's a righteous man, and righteous people get frustrated. We call that righteous indignation. And he was confused about what was going on. So it just tells me that I can bring, my concerns to God. I can know that when I ask questions, it's not a sign that my faith is weak. It's not a sign that I'm not saved anymore. But, it's a part of, I believe, authentic relationship with the Father that I can ask. Even with my natural father, there was nothing that I could not ask my father. There was nothing, even my grandfather, there was nothing that I couldn't ask them. The thing I had to be careful with is how you went to them, right? It's how you ask your question. And so I also know that, again, justice is not immediate. So sometimes it will feel like the other side is winning, but I do know that God is not blinded to what is going on. Let's take a look at our next set of scriptures beginning at verse 9. In verses 9 through 10, Job continues his observation of injustice in the world with focus on specific populations of vulnerable people where, they are being exploited by the wicked with seemingly no repercussions. And so Job uses this really what I consider colorful imagery starting in verse 9, snatching the fathers. This is a really disturbing image in my mind of children, of orphans, being torn away from the little security that they have. In these ancient cultures, to lose a father would leave a child in an incredibly vulnerable position. So, when Job talks about being snatched, you got to think about something being forcefully taken or plundered. Think about the level of cruelty that is involved with that. So, it's not just that the children are suffering, but they are being actively oppressed and exploited. And so when I think about that image in today's context, I do think about populations of people who are voiceless or defenseless, whether they are children, poor populations, or marginalized groups. And in verse 10, the naked and the hungry, Job continues to point out how the poor are forced to work even though they don't have clothes to cover themselves. Like, they harvest fields that don't belong to them, and yet they never see the fruits of their labor. And it is like this reminder of injustice where labor is exploited by the rich. There are places in the world where people are exploited for the work that they do, being paid incredibly low wages. So that's anywhere where disadvantaged people are forced to work not only for low wages, but in unfair work conditions. And so all of those are kind of what we should think about as Job talks about the people who are oppressed. Verse 11, working but thirsty. This is a picture of workers pressing olive oil and treading wine press. And those were two important areas of agriculture in his day. And so these people are working, but they're being denied the basics that they need. Food and water, like that, not asking for hard things, but food and water. And so again, this just highlights that imbalance of wealth and resource that can exist in society. And it is where those who do the most physically demanding work are often those who benefit the least from the work. And we see that today. In verse 12, the dying and the ignored. And here Job is emphasizing the suffering and the oppressed, people who are under oppression, whose the cries of the wounded go, but God doesn't seem to be stepping in to do anything about it. So that whole ignored thing, and we know, Job has expressed feeling abandoned. The other lesson this week from the International is from Psalm 22. And I related Job to David's writing, and now I'll do the same in this space, that even in Psalm 22, take a read, it's just 11 verses. But like David talks about, I am crying, you're not responding, you have abandoned me. So Job here is using similar language where he talks about sort of the struggle in the silence of God. Like, the silence of God can be a very hard place because sometimes it feels like the issue or the situation is being ignored. So, if you are going through something today and it's really hard and you're asking the question, where is God? Job was feeling the exact same way. Here are a few key learnings from verses 9 through 12. Injustice affects those most vulnerable. And so when we need to think about the world around us, the poor, the fatherless, the oppressed, that they are bearing the brunt of injustice. And so it's not enough to simply just acknowledge their pain. Like, we are all called to stand up for them. And I believe that as believers, we've got to pay more attention. And there has to be something on the inside of us that compels us to do more than know that we are on our way to heaven and we are so glad. But how do we stand up for their pain? How do we give voice to those who are voiceless? And so, the Bible shows us that God has a heart for those who are marginalized. So I am challenged, and I hope that you'll be challenged to reflect on how you offer some sort of care in your life, and know that exploitation is not a new problem, right? So even though it's hard to watch as we watch our news, it is not a new issue. So even in Bible times, we saw this level of exploitation of the wealthy against the marginalized people. And today we are called to speak out against exploitation in the same way. The final thing is that God's silence does not mean God's abuse. I'll say that again. God's silence does not mean God's abuse. So even though Job is clearly frustrated with God's apparent silence, it does not mean that God is not present. Even though I know we've all wondered, well, God, why don't you react sooner? Why don't you step in sooner? We just have to know that God is concerned about us. And even when we don't see his hand, God is still at work. I don't know who that's for today. You may not see him moving as quickly as you want him to move or in the exact ways that you want him to move, but just know, even when we cannot see his hand, we can trust our God who is faithful, and we can trust that he is at work. Verses 19 through 25. Job is reflecting on sort of this contradiction between justice and the fate of the wicked. He is speaking about how their lives, we talked about no repercussions. They're not being punished for what's going on. So in verse 19, drought and heat, he's comparing the fate of the wicked to natural forces like drought and heat, which consume snow, right? So the implication is that just like nature inevitably erodes or consumes, so will, death and divine judgment catch up with the wicked. What he's saying is, it's going to catch up at some point in time. Systems may have to come together, even in nature. Things got to come together for it to be taken care of, for things to be consumed or to erode. But Job is aware that this will be taken care of. Life on earth is temporary, right? I know we have to live this life. It is challenging sometimes, but we've got to keep in mind that it is temporary. And the wicked, no matter how prosperous they seem now, they are all going to face the judgment. Everyone is going to face a judgment, and they are going to have to face the consequences and be reminded that no one escapes death. In verse 20, the forgotten and feasted upon. Here Job is describing how the wicked are quickly forgotten. Right? After they die, they are quickly forgotten. Even their memory is erased. So he uses the imagery of how their bodies are being will be feasted upon by worms. And, that again just really lets us know how fleeting earthly power is. And it's really sobering to think about how quickly people move on. Right? How quickly people move on, even with the most powerful. While they're here, their names are in lights, the whole thing. When they're gone, they're gone. And so, it really should make all of us think about, what kind of legacy is going to be important for you to leave behind? Do you want a legacy that's built on temporary success? Or do you want a legacy that is, built on your faith in God? In verse 21, mistreating the vulnerable. He's noting that the wicked are often the ones who prey on the barren and the widow, the people who are already vulnerable. They're already in their tough situations, and these actions are about, extra moral cruelty and corruption. And so, when we think about, again, those who don't have power or voice, God calls us to protect those who are weak and not to take advantage of them. Verse 22, rising in power, but briefly. The wicked may rise to power and they may seem invincible, but their strength is only temporary. God is going to allow them to prosper for a time, but ultimately they will fall. And that should give us hope, right? Because it means that God may allow them to prosper and to thrive, but all that is short-lived in the grand scheme of things. God is sovereign. He's King of Kings. And so I can trust his timing. I can trust what he is doing, his plan, even when injustice seems to go unchecked. And I mean, I could list the things for you, like Job, that I look around and I see in the world and I think that it's unfair, but I do trust that God and his timing will deal with it. Verse 22, rising. We just did that one. Verse 23, false security. The wicked have this sense of false security because what they put their hope in wealth and in their power. But Job knows that's all an illusion. Wealth and power is all an illusion. God's watchful eye is on the wicked. And so, first of all, before I talk about the wicked, I think there's a caution even for us, right? That we've got to be careful that we don't put our trust in material things, that we don't put our trust in education. And I love it all. I love education. I have my share of letters behind my name. I think it's fantastic. But we can't put our hope and our trust in those accomplishments. We can't put our hope and our trust in our careers and our bank accounts. Ultimately, we have to trust in God. He is the only, all this other stuff is fleeting. All this social status, it is all fleeting, but it is God that brings lasting peace and security. Verse 24, exalted, then gone. Job is comparing like the rise of the wicked to, and like how they momentarily flourish. It's like a plant, right? Plants will come up. My mom has beautiful tulips. And the spring, like I think her yard is always incredible, but I especially love the tulips in the spring. And I'm like, oh, they're beautiful. And we'll take pictures the whole nine, but they don't last long, right? So it's a beauty that's there. And then they're gone until the next season. And so it's a reminder that the wicked may be high up for a time, and then suddenly they'll be gone. And so again, we've got to focus on what is lasting. I think that's a lesson there. Rather than chasing what's temporary, that we go after what will last. And finally, in verse 25, who will challenge this? Job is ending this section with a question by basically daring anyone to refute. Who's going to check me, boo? Who's going to refute my observations, right? He is confident in what he sees and confident in that he knows that it is true, that the wickedness may go unchecked in this life, but it doesn't escape God's purview. God sees all. God knows all. God is going to judge it. So it's this really powerful statement that, again, it reflects the frustration that a lot of us may feel as we look at evil in the world, but it also has to encourage us by becoming a promise that we too know that the justice of God is inevitable. My 3 quick learnings out of this section: temporary power doesn't equal success. The wicked may seem to have everything, but their power and their security are just an illusion. And I need to focus on and seek a foundation rooted in God, because earthly success is just that. It's earthly and it's fleeting. God sees injustice. And I already mentioned about building a legacy that is lasting. And I want to build a legacy that is lasting, that those behind me will have a record of the faith that I had, and, that I wanted to be a kind person, that I cared about the world around me, that I sought to live a life that pleased God. And that to me is more important than any other success that I may have in this life. It doesn't mean that I don't want to enjoy nice things or accomplish more great things, but I want to make sure that those never take a seat of priority over understanding who God is and the faith that I have in him. Here's my summary of this lesson again. As I look at chapter 24, I I can't ignore the tension of what's happening in the world versus what I know to be true about God. And I'm honest enough to say that, like Job, I do struggle with injustice. I work in the legal system. I work in the legal field. And so I look around all the time and I see things that don't seem to be fair. I see people get away with things that other populations of people, lose their lives for. It seems that people suffer in silence. But from this lesson, again, I know that it is okay to sit honestly with those things. It's okay to take those questions to God. I think that when we don't wrestle with the things that we see, it is dangerous because it means that we have become desensitized to the world around us. And I believe that God calls us to have a role and a space and a voice in what is going on around. So my process this week is, number one, recognize the reality of the world's injustices, just like Job, and acknowledge that things don't always make sense. Number two, I can look for where God is in the middle of it, realizing that just because I don't see his hand doesn't mean he's not present. And lastly, and most importantly for me, I want to hold on to hope and know that God's justice, even though it seems like slow justice, even though I don't know when, that his justice is the ultimate justice. And I never want to lose my ability to hope and to trust in it. My word for this week is deliver. Deliver. I believe that God will deliver those who are oppressed from the hands of the wicked. So that was kind of if my word of the week is sometimes how I would summarize this lesson in one word, or sometimes it's inspired by the lesson title. But deliver. My D is for demand justice from God with honesty and faith, knowing that he hears my cries. E is empathizing with the vulnerable who suffer under oppression, understanding that God sees their pain. My L is about looking beyond temporary success of the wicked and remembering that their time is fleeting and God's justice is final. My I is intervening where I can to help those in need. I believe that I am God's hand and God's feet to bring relief to the oppressed. I'm actually God's voice to bring relief to the oppressed. My V is valuing God's ultimate justice, trusting that even when it's delayed, it will come in his perfect time. E, expect that God's justice may not always align with Waynell's timing, but rest assured that his ways are always higher. And R, remember that my role is not just to wait on God's justice, but to act where I can to bring his love and fairness to others. This is our lesson for this week. I do pray that something helpful has been shared with you as you are preparing for your classes on this week. I do invite you to leave a comment. I love reading them. Try to respond to as many as we can. And I encourage you to don't just tell the story of Job, but find your place in the story. You can probably tell that I'm relating to this quarter's lessons a little bit differently. It may seem awfully personal, but as I've continued to share, I don't have a YouTube channel for the sake of building a YouTube brand. I'm a real Sunday school teacher. I'm a real Sunday school superintendent. So for me, this lesson has to minister to me before I'm able to, share it in a space of learning with other people. So I hope that you'll do the same. And my voice is playing out, so I'm done for now. I love you all, and I'll see you in Sunday school. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for studying with me this week. I want to remind you of my ask, please, that you support me with the gift of $9. And if you've never done so before, tip over to my Etsy store. If you're looking for great gifts for Sunday school students, or maybe a student who wants to celebrate your teacher, superintendent who wants gifts, go and check out the Etsy store. There are t-shirts, tote bags, candles, pouches, you name it, all celebrating Sunday school. So there are at least 8 different designs for both Sunday school and church school. So check them out. And if you've not already done so, check out my book on Amazon. So many of you have ordered it and I've got incredible feedback, and I appreciate you so much. I'm excited about this devotional, which says it's for Sunday school teachers, but honestly, it works for anyone serving in any space, ministry or even corporate spaces. So if you're looking for a devotional to encourage you along your way, check it out. Love you and see you all soon.
Sunday school with that Sunday school.